Chapter 55, November 20th, 2173, 1434, Arcturus System, Arcturus Station. Andrew turned his head slightly towards the right and tensed the muscles in his neck. He heard a satisfying crack and repeated the motion toward the other side. While keeping most of his focus on the words spoken by the other people in the meeting room, he slowly tensed and untensed every part of his body to get the blood flowing. Long meetings like the one he was currently participating in had the disadvantage of making his body stiff, especially the parts where he had been hurt by more than scrapes. Reminders of an active youth, he told himself, whenever one of them hurt more than usual. Andrew's eyes wandered toward the head of the table, where a middle-aged woman with light blonde hair and sky-blue eyes sat. She didn't look a day over 35, and while Andrew knew her correct age, which was also public knowledge as a person of public interest, he would never mention it out loud. Some things just weren't done among colleagues. One of her hands held her chin up while the other lay flat on the table, her fingers thrumming rhythmically. It wasn't a nervous habit, but something she did whenever her focus was divided between listening and thinking further about it. And that concludes my report about the readiness of our inner colonies, Madam President, finished Lincoln Finner, the Secretary of the Interior. Thank you, Lincoln. How long do you think you will need to finish the report for the outer colonies? You mentioned earlier that the report would take some more time, responded the woman at the head of the conference, Miriam LeBlanc, the current president of the Alliance. We should get the last pieces of data at the end of the week, and I don't think it will take more than another one after that to get everything compiled in a report. Have it on my desk the day you finish, and I'm sure the others will appreciate it too if they get a copy. That will not be a problem, answered Finner, slightly bowing his head toward her. Andrew sighed mentally in relief that he wouldn't have to listen to another report from Finner in the near future. The man might be competent and knew what he was doing, but he also was one of the least gifted oral narrators Andrew had the displeasure to meet. It wasn't like the information wasn't there. The significant details were easy to find, and the garbage others added to their reports was mostly kept out. Yet Finner somehow made it possible with the sound of his voice alone to make it sound so dull that one couldn't wait until it was finished. Perhaps Finner trained himself to do it this way to reduce the number of meetings he had to attend by making it an agony for everyone. It would explain why he had to be present at far fewer meetings with concerned members of the Parliament who wanted to be kept in the loop concerning the state of the Alliance. It was an even better method than Andrew's reply. There are parts that you don't have the clearance for. Whenever some concerned Parliament member wanted to know about this or that operation. Are there any more questions for Secretary Finner before we move on to the next point of the agenda? Asked President LeBlanc while looking every person participating in the eye one after the other. When she looked at Andrew, he subtly shook his head. He had no questions that needed to be asked right now, and if anything came up, he couldn't send one of his own to find out. He would go right to the source in private. I've got one question, said the Secretary of Defense, Vincent Welt. You mentioned it that the number of new signups for the Alliance military has dropped by more than 40% across the inner colonies. And while I've seen the same numbers from my people, we don't know why. Do you have any explanation for that? I have, replied Finner. Most people living in the inner colonies believe that with our closer ties to the Citadel and its associated races, the danger of a new conflict that would involve them is incredibly low. Furthermore, the sentiment that the galaxy is safe and that the Alliance doesn't need that big of a military has spread among them. It is a mindset propagated by a few relatively favored politicians. My department doesn't see much of a danger right now, but if that trend continues for much longer, we will intervene and start to reverse it. Favored politicians? Asked Welt, wanting clarification. Local politicians and some members of the Parliament, all part of the so-called integration faction, responded Andrew in place of the Secretary of the Interior. The AIS already looked into them. Some believe what they are saying, but those with the loudest voice seem to have backers from outside. There was no question what he meant with outside, and it was easy to see from the grimaces what the people present thought about this interference in the internal affairs of the Alliance. It wasn't something new as the first attempts started from the moment the Alliance first set foot on the Citadel. But for the most time, there hadn't been any sign that the overtures from the other species in the galaxy were effective, since there had been still a lot of distrust toward the newly revealed aliens at the time. And while the attitude and sentiment toward aliens had improved, it wasn't like there was unconditional trust between humanity and everyone else. Not enough time had passed for something like that to happen, and the sheer otherness wasn't helping, as humans had always been apprehensive of what they considered other. "Are you keeping an eye on them?" asked President LeBlanc, frowning as she thought about the implications outside interference could have on the internal situation of the alliance. "Of course," replied Andrew, a tiny smirk finding its way on his face. "We got their names, the amount of money they got, the promises they made and got, and are currently occupied with getting all the names of those who wish to meddle with the alliance's politics. When you have the names, forward them to our ambassador on the Citadel. Anita would have more use for it than any of us," ordered President LeBlanc, and Andrew nodded to show that he would do so the moment his people were finished with the investigation. "Did that answer all your questions, Vincent?" "It did, ma'am," answered Weld. "A few others may come up in the future, but those can be answered outside this frame." "Very well," said President LeBlanc. "Then let us continue with your report about the readiness of our armed forces and the situation at our border with the Batarians. Andrew, I expect you to add your information whenever you think something should be known to us all." With a nod, Andrew signaled that he understood her order. He would let everyone know bits and pieces that were not too confidential to make sense of the situation, and more importantly, help plan for the future. Anything else would be for the president's ears and only hers. Except if Welt needed to hear something too, he corrected himself quickly. Sometimes it was tempting to keep information to oneself, to feel like the most knowledgeable person in the room. Yet, important information had to be shared among those he saw as allies, or else the alliance would be slow to react to any events needing a quick response. Furthermore, Andrew would still know more than anyone else. It simply was his job to know things others don't, and he was very good at his job. Welt coughed slightly and straightened his posture before beginning his report. "I will begin with the conscription rates across the alliance. As we already heard, the rates dropped among the inner colonies by 40%, and Earth has even decreased by 50% compared to the last few years. Earth hasn't shown a lot of people wanting to join the military in the past decade, so even if the rates decreased by 50% in actual numbers, that shouldn't be too much of a hassle. It's the safest and most protected planet in the alliance. So of course the people wouldn't feel they needed to join the military to keep themselves safe," inserted Secretary Finner. "A point to note, Lincoln, but please let Vincent continue his report and only interject when you have a question or need clarification," chided President LeBlanc lightly without ever looking Finner's way, who lowered his head respectfully in apology toward Welt. Welt waved the apology away, not disgruntled by the interruption in the slightest. "Vincent is right. Earthers never signed up in the same percentage as the inner or outer colonies, but they are still a high enough number to be concerned about if the trend continues. Speaking about them, the outer colonies show no sign of deviance outside the expected. Some years more sign up, some less." "And what are the total numbers of our forces?" asked President LeBlanc. "On how many can we count on in case of emergency? If we ignore those still in training and Hadesing is still in the process of being established. 1st to 6th fleets are combat ready, and we're in the end phase of getting the 7th fleet up to our standards. Each fleet is headed by a dreadnought, supported by at least 2 carriers. Furthermore, a dozen destroyers are part of each fleet, which use the modular adaptation technology, which means that should we be thrown into a situation where the Treaty of Ferrixon is simply ink on paper, we will be able to update them with the same mass accelerator cannon we have on our dreadnought ships. But they have enough firepower without the upgrade to become dangerous for any starship, regardless of their classification." Welt took a moment to refill the empty glass before him with water from the pitcher on the table. He drank half the glass before lowering it on the table and continued without further ado. "Besides our heavy hitters, our fleets are supplemented by around 20 cruisers and 50 frigates. After the 7th fleet is up and running, we plan to increase the number of destroyers, cruisers, frigates, and carriers by 50% in each fleet. If you want, I could pull up the numbers on our fighters, but I don't think that will be necessary right now." The collective shaking of heads confirmed Welt's suspicion. Of course, besides the number of fighting ships I just mentioned, every fleet possesses numerous support ships too. Their task is to either make repairs on-site or ferry troops and supplies to combat theaters. That doesn't mean our combat ships do not possess military personnel trained for shipside or ground combat, but the numbers are too low for serious operations planetside. So that means we are using something akin to troop transporters? Asked President LeBlanc. Yes, ma'am. Usually our carriers could serve that purpose too, and ferry our troops via gunships or shuttles down to a planet. But Dr. Hoshiume presented us with a new design around half a year back that would allow us to land the support ship and use it as a mobile base on the planet itself. Their defensive systems are perfect to give them a secure place to retreat and rest. Furthermore, using the transporters to carry the heavy equipment has freed up enough space for other things. As such, I have authorized the addition of around 20 transporters for every fleet. And before questions concerning the financial side come up, I've already submitted a budget report, and everything is within the yearly allowance the Parliament approves. How far along is our special project in the Olympus system? The short twitch of Welt's lips told Andrew everything he needed to know about how the project was going. Not that he needed it. After all, he was the person who ensured that no concrete news about the project sickered through to the rest of the galaxy, and the only thing the galaxy knew were baseless rumors. Rumors that he buried under a ton of others that sounded more and less fantastical than that the Alliance was building super dreadnoughts in a system that had no access to the mass relay network. One couldn't destroy knowledge, especially rumors, once it went out to the people, but one could make sure it sounded like a lie. And it was only the hardcore conspiracy fanatics giving those rumors anytime nowadays. Of course, the Solarians had their suspicions. After all, they knew that it was possible to travel to systems outside the reach of the mass relays, and Andrew would bet that they would try to find out if there was any truth to those rumors when they got their DR drives to work flawlessly. It would take the Solarians 2 more years to complete the DR drive to work in the same range as the Alliances from 5 years ago, and to work out the kinks around it at Andrew's estimation, and another 2 to come close to theirs. Nothing the AIS could do would stop it, yet perhaps they could delay it for another year or 2. Enough for the Alliance's scientists to develop an even more sophisticated model. At least that would happen if the president decided she didn't want to go through with Andrew's plan to play nice with the Solarians. After all, if the other side would get what they wanted regardless of your actions, why not help them achieve their goal and take compensation for the help rendered? In Andrew's mind, that would be preferable, but that would depend on the president's decision. If she decided to sabotage the Solarians' research instead, Andrew would grumble for a short minute and then get to work immediately. Yet he somehow had the feeling it wouldn't come to that. After all, the president was giving his suggestion some serious thought if she hadn't decided what to do after he gave the proposal 2 weeks ago. And because of that, we will see some slight delay in the construction, finished Welt. And Andrew noticed that he hadn't focused on the conversation to consciously follow it. Of course, he already knew the reason for the delay, but it would have been interesting to know what Welt had said and what not to compare it with his own information about the situation. No matter, he would later look through the transcript before filing the copies in the AIS and the presidential archives. When can we expect them to be ready to be integrated into our forces? And I don't mean when the field tests begin, asked President LeBlanc with a raised eyebrow that conveyed her annoyance at the delay. Andrew had to stop the slight smile from forming on his face. He knew she wanted to reveal the ruler-class ships while holding her position as president since she was expected to win the next election. It would have been the crowning achievement of her career that would have cemented her position in history as the president who led the Alliance when they created something the galaxy had never seen since the first Asari had started forming words into sentences. After all, nobody knew what the Protheans built during the peak of their civilization. The projected time frame is around 2180 for the first, probably in the later half of the year. Testing will begin in 2179 and will take no longer than a year to find any issues that would prevent the ship's integration into our forces. If there are any, we'll take care of them. It should help with getting the other 2 ready for deployment. Their construction should be finished in early 2183 and joining our forces later that year. It may not happen during our tenure, but we should be happy that it's happening this century at least, Lincoln commented with a sigh, a sentiment that was shared by President LeBlanc, if Andrew interpreted her audible exhale correctly. Will it really take that long? Can't we accelerate the building process? We could, said Andrew, drawing the attention toward him. I was there when the project was first discussed and started and have watched over it until now, keeping unfriendly eyes away. I probably know more about the project than anyone else except Dr. Hoshiume. If you look for the transcript of that particular discussion in the presidential archives, you will find that the first completion date was around 5 years from now. Andrew directed the last sentence directly toward President LeBlanc, hiding his chide behind the softness of his words. In Andrew's opinion, she should have read everything about the project before bringing it up, especially why it should take until the late 70s to finish it. And why was the first finishing date set for 78? Asked Finner, while President LeBlanc only watched Andrew with narrowed eyes, letting Finner ask the question. Andrew's eyes flashed quickly to Welt, watching his reaction to the question. His face could be mistaken for a statue. Not a single expression or twitch of facial muscles could be seen. Satisfied that the Secretary of Defense knew the reasons behind the late finishing date, Andrew turned to Finner and explained, "There are multiple reasons for that. The first one is obviously secrecy. Getting enough materials to the Olympus system for a single ruler-class ship without anyone noticing or asking where all those materials are disappearing to. It's one of our goals. We do not want others, be it the Citadel Council or even the less-than-friendly parties inside the Parliament, to know what we're building. Raise that number from 1 to 3, and the difficulty triples too. The second reason is our position in the galactic community. Those agreeing to the project in the first place desired to ensure that there wouldn't be any immediate hostile actions from the others when we unveiled the ruler class. That's why your predecessors tried to build closer ties with the Turians. If we could get friendly relations with them, they would not decry our actions as acts of war or try to take them away. They will want our help to build one for themselves. Furthermore, as it will cause tensions anyway, unveiling so much firepower will do it. No matter the circumstances, we wanted to give the Alliance more time to build up its power base to have a better chance at defending ourselves, should the worst-case scenario happen and a war with the Citadel break out." "Do you think a war will happen?" asked President LeBlanc. "Yes," said Andrew without hesitation, shocking two people in the room. "Perhaps it will not be called a war, but we will take serious military actions before the turn of the decade, maybe even before its halfway point. Our enemy?" President LeBlanc's words were short and commanding, exactly how Andrew expected from a leader who focused on her task of protecting the people who looked towards her for guidance. "The Batarians," answered Welt in Andrew's place. "They want to take us down a peg or two and can barely wait for a chance. Shouldn't they still be concerned about the anti-government elements inside their territory?" asked Finner. "Not as much as we hoped," replied Andrew. "While they started strong, especially with outside help," he didn't mention the help came from the AIS, as that was implied, and would only lead to negative consequences if mentioned aloud. "The Batarian government and military were surprisingly apt in finding and taking them down. Our projections show that in a year, most of the anti-government movement's leaders will either be dead or in prison. The rest will disappear into insignificance and do nothing more than be an occasional thorn in the hegemony side." "Not even with support?" asked President LeBlanc. "Not even with support," confirmed Andrew. "Yet, that does not mean we will have to fear an attack from the Batarians, at least not for the next 2 to 3 years. While the anti-government movement couldn't accomplish its stated goals of changing the government, it still managed to destabilize it and the region where the revolution happened enough that the Batarians would concentrate on fixing the damage first before anything else. It should give us enough time to prepare for anything they will do, and the AIS believes that they will use their connections with the pirate and slaver gangs in that part of the galaxy to plan an attack." "Plausible deniability?" asked Finner with a raised eyebrow that conveyed his thoughts about that strategy. "Flimsy, plausible deniability, but yes," answered Andrew without missing a beat. "It worked for them before, and that was when they orchestrated an attack on a minor SRE colony. If the Council isn't willing to act when it's one of theirs, I don't believe they will look twice at our case should we bring it to their attention. Then we will have to do it ourselves," decided President LeBlanc with an edge to her tone. Will we be able to do it? She directed the question toward Welt, who looked back with hard eyes. Without a doubt, ma'am, he answered, and not even a speck of uncertainty could be heard in his voice or seen on his face. Even should the AIS fail to find out where and when the attack happens, we will repel them with minimal casualties. Our patrols can reinforce any colony at the border with the Batarians fast, and our colonial defense systems will give the attacking fleet a pounding before they arrive. Counterstrike options? Quick and merciless, answered Welt. But I believe Andrew already has a target in mind for such an operation. I have, confirmed Andrew with a nod. 3 worlds with Hegemony support, but not officially part of it. Just as the Hegemony would call it a pirate attack, we would call it an anti-pirate and slaver operation. If Hegemony personnel is present during our counterstrikes, they will probably have switched sides and turned traitors to the Hegemony. After all, the Hegemony wouldn't work with such people against the Citadel law, would they? It seems we have the bare bones of a plan for when needed. We will talk about it more when we're closer to the actual event. Let us shelve this topic and move to the next point. President LeBlanc shifted in her seat and looked at Andrew. When can we expect Mr. Denebrin to return to Alliance-controlled territory? He's sorely missed. Andrew knew that this question would come. It was no secret that the two were friends, and Oscar was far too valuable to let him out of the Alliance's influence. Yet he was too powerful to dictate his actions, or even think about restricting his freedom. Oscar had made himself into the nightmare of every leader. Around the turn of the year, Andrew answered with a smile, and he could see how LeBlanc's eyebrows raised a few millimeters in surprise, not having expected a definitive answer after he answered vaguely the last few times he had been asked. His business on Ilium will conclude before the year is over, and he already expressed his desire to me to return to the Citadel when everything is over. I probably can convince him to spend some time inside the Alliance. After all, he is due for another visit to the university he founded. Checking in on his holdings on Earth and Terra Nova shouldn't be a problem, too. Very well, said President LeBlanc. I look forward to seeing him home again, and I'm sure he's looking forward to it, too. And his miniature war with Eclipse? Interjected Finner when it looked like the subject of Oscar Denebrin was about to be dropped. Are we truly willing to ignore the elephant in the room and do nothing regarding that? And what should we do about that, in your opinion? Asked Welt. I don't know, answered Finner honestly, but I don't think we should let Denebrin get away with it without any censor. He started a war with a mercenary organization, but a war nonetheless. While most of it is happening in neutral territory without any council oversight, and the general populace doesn't know anything more than rumors, it still shines a negative light on the Alliance. It shows that we do not have any control over his actions and makes us seem weak. An excellent point, conceded President LeBlanc, who had closed her eyes, unwilling to do anything regarding this problem. Yet she knew that she had to do something. I personally have no problems with that, interjected Welt before the president could say anything. So he gets rid of a few mercenaries, and everything he does is happening inside the laws governing the galaxy. Disputes between organizations with military power aren't something new. As far as I know, the Blood Pack and Eclipse are at each other's throats like this every 20 years or so. What makes this so different? His close connection to us, the government, replied Finner. None of the organizations you mentioned have such blatant ties to anyone in the government. As you said, obvious ties, countered Welt. Dig deeper than the surface and you will find them. After all, it isn't like the AIS had to search much until they found the connection between the Asari counselor and the crime boss of Omega. Welt looked over to Andrew for confirmation of his words and got a nod from Andrew. I, for my part, am thankful to see how good the ships are. Mr. Denebrin is providing for us. We haven't had any combat situations where we could truly put them through their paces. Furthermore, whenever I spoke with one of my Turian contacts, they admired Mr. Denebrin's actions. They wanted to do something similar for ages, and now that is happening, especially why it's happening, gets us more points in our favor from them than not. While Welt and Finner threw their arguments at each other, Andrew observed President LeBlanc, who hadn't opened her eyes again. Yet he could see how her ears twitched with every argument, taking all information in before deciding what to do. When she finally opened her eyes, she silenced the arguing men with a raised hand, a command that was followed without delay. She turned toward Andrew and asked, "If we censor Mr. Denebrin, what will he do? You know him the best." "It depends on what you're planning. Yet Oscar will probably nod and do as you ask. He will understand that you have to act or risk losing face. So keeping him inside Alliance territory and not allowing him to leave for a year or two?" "House arrest?" asked Andrew, amusement shining through in his voice. "Oh, he will grumble, but do what you want. Then, when you speak to each other next, please inform him of this decision before we make it official. It's better he knows of that beforehand, in my opinion. Oscar will appreciate it." "Then that is the end of this discussion," announced President LeBlanc, with a hard stare toward the two other men inside the room. From the looks on their faces, they knew that there would be no changing her mind on the subject in either direction. Let's move on with the next point. Chapter 56, December 7, 2173, 1734, Ilium, Tissail System, Nosastra. Leaning back in his chair, Lawrence couldn't help the smile that grew on his face. "Always a nice feeling to see everything fall into place," he whispered. A few weeks ago, he finally found his target and followed her to her hideout, or at least one of her hideouts. She changed the place from where she commanded her mercenaries every 3 days, yet there was one place she always returned to more often than the other 5 hideouts Lawrence identified. He could understand why she used the place as her main base of operation. After all, not even Ad Astra would expect Eclipse to operate from a skyscraper consisting mainly of residential units. 3 whole floors were fortified like a military base and teeming with Eclipse personnel. There were only 2 entries or exits to those floors, and both were heavily fortified. Well, there was a 3rd exit, if one had a way to survive when jumping out of a window from the 57th to 59th story at least. If the building's plans, which had cost Lawrence a small fortune to obtain, were correct, then Eclipse, or the people who had the previous ownership, had to have been involved in the construction. There could be no other explanation for the fact that the regular staircase and elevator could let you access every floor but those 3. And Lawrence didn't mean not getting on those floors because you're missing the correct key card or something like that. The elevator doors from the 57th to 59th floor did not exist. The doors at the west and east staircases were only dummies. It wasn't physically possible to enter those 3 floors via the methods accessible to the other residents of the skyscraper. Instead, there was an extra staircase right next to the east staircase for the residents. The secret staircase could only access through the basement and only had one door on the 57th floor. It was clear to Lawrence that this was only an emergency entry or exit in case the elevator, which could only be accessed via the basement, was shut down for any reason. The secret elevator only went up to the 57th floor like the staircase. It was hidden inside a pillar that the official building plans declared simply as that. A pillar to support the building's stability. A simple yet effective disguise, as Lawrence wouldn't have known that there was a hidden elevator if he hadn't seen the floor plans beforehand when he visited the building to get a good look at the area. In fact, the whole setup was quite ingenious, as he would bet that none of the residents had any idea that 3 complete floors on the higher levels of the building were used as a mercenary base. If he had visited the building without prior knowledge, he wouldn't have seen anything out of place. Of course, he sent a report concerning his findings to Terra, who, in turn, sent it higher up while adding to his recommendation of setting up bases for the AIS like this in the bigger human cities across the Alliance territory. He hadn't heard anything back, but he guessed that his proposal would find approval if the AIS didn't already do it, and Lawrence just hadn't heard about any of them. He wouldn't put it past the AIS and their need-to-know policy among the lower ranks. In any case, he had observed the building from all 4 cardinal directions for a few days, and not even once had Lawrence seen anyone entering or leaving that could be identified as a member of Eclipse. The only logical conclusion was that there had to be a secondary entrance in the basement Eclipse used to transfer people and materials. A more in-depth investigation and infiltration of the basement helped to find the secondary entrance hidden behind a fake wall leading into a tunnel to a different house where the Eclipse personnel went in and out hourly. While checking out the basement had been relatively easy for Lawrence, getting into the 3 floors of the Eclipse base was a different undertaking. There were only 2 entrances, as the 3 floors were independent of the rest of the building, and one could only get to the 59th floor if one entered via the 57th. Those 3 floors were connected by their own elevators and staircases that could only be accessed through those floors. It would be nearly impossible to enter those floors without being detected, and not even his suit's abilities would make it easier. While its stealth capabilities were much better than anything the members of the Alliance military soldiers with the infiltrator specialization had access to, they were still subject to limitations. The suit's batteries couldn't keep up the invisibility forever, and there were too many cameras and patrols throughout the 3 floors and the staircase leading up to them to have a hiding place to let them recharge without being found in the meantime. Yet there was one option Lawrence found, an option that revealed a structural weakness to exploit. When he first saw it on the building's plans, he couldn't help the laugh that escaped him. It was such a stereotypical weakness that there could be no other reaction, and he was sure that any other AIS agent would have reacted the same. After all, was there anything more cliched than using the ventilation system to infiltrate a heavily defended base? The ventilation system was too small to climb into it himself, not to speak of how loud it would have been if he crawled through it. But it was perfect to send through some spy drones to get a picture of the layout of the 3 floors and to plant a few observation devices. Lawrence didn't even wait 2 hours after finding this weakness before leaving his hotel room with his equipment, and now he just had to sit at his desk and could observe everything that was going on in the Eclipse base from afar. Thankfully, the drones worked automatically and cataloged everything that was going on in the base since Lawrence didn't have time to do it manually, as his target did not stay there the whole time. She visited the other Eclipse bases regularly to bring up morale, check on things personally, or punish incompetent members. If Lawrence had to pick a moment to strike, it would be during one of those visits, as the security and defensive measures at those places were not up to the level of their main base. Yet, he would probably not get the chance. In the last few days, Lawrence had noted an increase in activities among all bases while at the same time, the fighting with Ad Astra's forces had nearly stopped. It seemed like something important was about to happen. A call to Terra confirmed his suspicions. Denebrin is going to end this conflict in 6 days, Terra told him yesterday. It seems like he's about to confront the person who employed Eclipse and take them out of the game. He wants Eclipse's leadership in shambles before that. Can you make it happen? If they are about to clash for the last time, Iori will not move from her fortress. I'll have to get here there, and that could be a problem. You having a problem? She asked, not believing that Lawrence would have any problems taking out a target. After all, his records didn't show a single mission that hadn't been completed satisfactorily. I could do it, he reassured, his pride rearing its head, but it would be easier with a team. The risk of the target escaping is too high if I go in. She mostly stays on the 3rd floor, and I would have to fight my way up from the 1st. Furthermore, detection is unavoidable, as there aren't enough places for my suit to recharge. Can't you hit her from the outside? There should be enough positions from where you could make the shot. The position is not the problem, Lawrence corrected. The command room has a window to the north, and there is a high enough building in that direction to make a shot. The problem is that the window is made of bulletproof glass with a double layer of kinetic barriers. Eclipse didn't shy away from the eye when they updated their defenses. My bullets could punch through. They have enough power behind them for that, but they would veer off course and probably miss. Usually, I would install a remote trigger to deactivate the barriers since the glass alone wouldn't be enough to stop them. But without getting in there, I can't, and the drones can't do it. So you're lacking the power? Terra asked, and Lawrence could hear that she was thinking about something. Yes, he answered tentatively. I'll contact you again tomorrow. I've heard about something that should help you with that. Without waiting for a response, Terra closed the connection, leaving Lawrence to wonder what she meant. He hadn't heard back from her until now and could only guess what she was doing. As if the universe heard his thoughts, his Omni tool started to flash in short intervals, indicating a call for him. Activating the features for a secure line, Lawrence took the call and asked, "Found what you were looking for?" "I did, and you're going to love it," answered Tara, who didn't seem surprised at his lack of a greeting, and responded likewise. Am I? Lawrence raised an eyebrow in question, something Tara couldn't see but could definitely hear in his tone. Yes, she replied and left no room for doubt. Is your line secure? I have a data package for you. Quickly opening another application on his Omni tool, Lawrence started the process to make sure that the connection on his end was secure enough to receive the data package without giving anything away. It wasn't often that Tara asked or did such things, but whenever she did, it was because she came across something that would be indispensable to the success of the mission. It is now, said Lawrence, when his Omni tool showed him that it finished securing the line. It should be there in a minute or two, replied Tara, and already he could see the download starting. When it finished, Lawrence didn't wait a moment before opening the file and asking, It arrived. What am I looking at? A new sniper rifle prototype, not even out of Ad Astra's labs. How did you get those schematics? I don't believe that Ad Astra would let them lie around if they are as new as you say, asked Lawrence as his eyes scanned everything displayed. Its design wasn't too different from the one he was used to, yet he could see that this model was bulkier than his. The most glaring difference was that the barrel looked like it could be swapped out and seemed proportionally longer than usual for a rifle of that size. I got them from our guy in acquisition. Heard him talking with one of your old trainers about a new rifle being tested by Ad Astra with much higher firepower than anything else currently on the market. I asked him yesterday if he could get me the schematics. He delivered. There are no real details about its construction and its internal structure, but the thing that will interest you the most, its performance test, is there. Look them over and tell me what you think. Lawrence opened the second file and had to stop his chin from falling when he saw the data. If everything he read was true, this rifle would be more than enough to get the job done. The speed and penetrative power of the bullets were off the charts in his opinion. The kickback would be a problem for most, yet with his suit giving Lawrence a minor boost in strength, he could handle it easily. There has to be a drawback besides the kickback, right? Else, I can't see how Ad Astra isn't bringing this on the market soon. True, agreed Tara without hesitation. There are drawbacks, yet they aren't significant for someone with your talent and experience in hitting a target. Okay, replied Lawrence slowly. Now you're making me worry. It's not like the rifle will explode in your hands after a shot. The problem is similar to that, but nothing so extreme. Could you please tell me? I need to know everything about this rifle to decide if it's useful enough or for what I have to do. You have seen the performance data, right? I heard from my contact in acquisition that the rifle's barrel can't withstand the force it's put through and has to be changed after every shot. Does the barrel get too hot? That could warp the metal and the rifle's shot would lose accuracy. If that is the case, I won't be using it, no matter the power. If I cannot hit my target, I would be better off storming the base. Don't worry, that is not the problem, assuaged Tara. Ad Astra's researchers wanted the rifle to function with the high performance you saw in the files, and dealing with the resulting heat was one of the first problems they tackled. The problem lies with the capacitors in the barrel, which are needed to accelerate the bullet to the speeds you saw. A single shot burns through them like a fire burns through an oil-soaked paper. And with no chance of repairing them, the barrel has to be exchanged, Lawrence concluded, a frown finding its way onto his face as he contemplated if the rifle could be used in his endeavors. Correct, said Tara. That's why the prototype looks like it does. The end product will probably have an encased barrel for structural integrity, but for now, as they are testing different methods, it is enough. And you think I could get one of the prototypes? I don't believe they're building and testing them here on Ilium. Something like this has to be tested inside the Alliance. Much more secure, too. You're right, Ad Astra isn't building them on Ilium, but they have the means to do so. Shouldn't take them longer than a day or two to make a prototype on site. That is, if you think that you need one. I don't want to strain any relationships with my contacts for something unneeded. Lawrence leaned back in his seat, rubbing his chin as he thought about the prototype. If what Tara said was true, it could be an advantage. Yet he was still skeptical. After all, they were talking about an unfinished prototype, and those had the tendency to not work as they should in critical moments. The rifle would be more than enough to pierce through Eclipse's defenses and turn his target into mush, but a single shot was all he would get. There would be no second chance. Lawrence let out a sigh before clapping his cheeks, banishing the thought from his mind. He was one of the best hunters of the AIS. He didn't need a second chance. One was more than enough. During the whole time he had been training for his position within the AAS, he had never needed a second try to get the job done, and the hunters were trained to never need a second try anyway. They were trained to be the best of the best, and the simple thought of not making it on the first try was already a sign that they were losing their edge. That was one of the first things they were taught by their trainers, and Lawrence definitely wasn't losing his edge, and he would prove it to the person who mattered the most, himself. "Ask them to build it," said Lawrence, deciding to use the prototype rifle. "I need 3 barrels, 2 for testing the rifle, and 1 to get the job done. I'll send you the details where you can pick it up tomorrow." "They are already making it," replied Tara Paul, with a tone that told Lawrence that she knew he would go for the option she offered him. He good-naturedly rolled his eyes. Sometimes it seemed like his handler knew him better than he did himself. December 10th, 2173, 2121. Ilium Tesalo System, Nos Astra. His hand slowly and methodically dismantled the rifle in front of him. He held every single part up to his eyes, inspecting them for any faults. There would be no room for any kind of equipment failure. Not now. Laying the pieces carefully down on a small blanket, Lawrence pulled out a cloth and dribbled a few drops of oil on it. As if the rifle had been his longtime partner, and not just a tool he possessed for less than 2 days, he took great care of giving each piece the attention they deserved. At first, Lawrence had been skeptical about the rifle's performance, despite Tara's assurances. Yet, when he met a team of Ad Astra's soldiers in an abandoned dockyard in the dead of the night to test it, he fell in love with it. He wore his nanofiber suit underneath his regular clothes, giving his strength a minor passive boost, and the kickback of the first shot had taken him by surprise nonetheless. Even the rocket launcher he tried during his training days hadn't thrown off his aim that much. Lawrence accounted it to his surprise, if only to spare his pride as the Ad Astra soldiers snickered around him as he was thrown on his butt. Thankfully, they had brought 2 more barrels than Lawrence said he would need, and after firing his 3rd shot, he could say with certainty that even if Ad Astra scientists never found a way to make a barrel hold out longer than a single shot, this rifle would and should become a part of every AIS hunter's equipment. It was simply perfect for them. The bullet was heavy and fast enough to simply ignore any obstacle in its way. The perfect tool for the assassination of a single target. When he left, Lawrence asked the Ad Astra soldiers to pass on his thanks to the genius who thought of such a wonderful toy, and they only smiled and said they would. After that, Lawrence didn't waste any time and traveled to the Eclipse base, intending to decide from which position he would strike. In the days before, he marked a few of them, but deciding which would be the best should only be done on the day of the strike. After all, the conditions were ever-changing. It would be embarrassing to be found by an unscheduled cleaning crew only because someone important was visiting the location in the next few days. That had happened to one of Lawrence's colleagues, and the story never failed to elicit a chuckle whenever it was told. It took him half of the early afternoon to decide on a skyscraper half a kilometer south of the building Eclipse was occupying, and another half an hour for the place within the selected skyscraper. Yet he couldn't have found a better place, as Lawrence had a free view of the level where his target would appear later on. Closing his eyes, Lawrence emptied his mind of superfluous thoughts. This wasn't the time to indulge in reminiscence. Right now, he was nothing but a hunter making sure that his tools of trade were in optimal condition. Slowly and carefully, he put every part of the rifle back together, and when he finished, his hand ghosted over it only a hair's breadth away. A swipe with his Omni tool to check if everything was correctly put together, to which the hunter nodded satisfied when he got the readout. He placed the rifle at his shoulder, his eye perfectly in line with the scope. It didn't take him long to survey the outside of the room where his target would appear, as he wouldn't be able to see through the mirrored windows the conventional way anyway. This was more to check if anything had changed, and if the sensors of his scope picked up any data that deviated from the one he picked up yesterday. Any deviation could cause him to miss his shot. Yet the hunter's sensors did not pick up any changes. He didn't feel any relief at that, but he would have felt annoyance if it had changed. Details changed. That was a fact of life. but that didn't mean that one desired them to change, not even for the better. After all, it would undo any previously made plan and could cause failure. The twitch of his ring finger activated the camera he painstakingly directed through the ventilation system to see into the room of his target, and with his middle finger the 4 small drones that had attached themselves at the 4 corners of the room's window. A thin screen started to spread out from the 4 drones, unseen to the naked eye and only visible through his scope, that could interpret the frequency of the screen. It grew and grew until it encompassed the whole window. The moment it finished, the camera within the ventilation system went to work. One of its scanners recorded everything that happened inside the room, while the other projected it onto the screen right outside the window, using its frequency to oscillate the particles until they formed a picture of the room's interior. In addition to the hunter's equipment that had already paid its price back and more, as not only things hidden by glass but stone and metal could be made visible too. Furthermore, it came out of the AIAIS's own labs, and as such, not even Ad Astra, their usual supplier for nifty gadgets, knew about it. Sadly, the picture it projected wasn't very clear. It simply showed the outlines from the inside, which would make it difficult to identify the target if he hadn't the camera to cross-reference. Slowly, the hunter felt how his mind went into a trance. Time started to feel unimportant. Time didn't matter. Time would only become important when the right moment arrived. And that moment came. 3 people entered the room. 1 was a Salarian and 2 were Asari. The Salarian was easily recognizable, even though the screen was the Salarian's head distinctive. The wild articulating Asari was probably the hunter's target, as that would fit her personality profile. Nonetheless, he closed his right eye and activated the camera feed. The hunter's hunch proved correct when he recognized the facial markings. His breathing slowed, and the same could be said for his heart. The internal dampers of the rifle helped to compensate for any movements of his body the hunter couldn't stop. It was a limitation of the human body that human ingenuity found an answer to. Every time the target moved, the cross of the scope would smoothly follow. He could feel the moment come closer. The moment appeared when the figure stopped, gesturing toward the Salarian, who suddenly started to float. When before it felt like time had become insubstantial, now it felt like the hunter could count every millisecond. He took in every scrap of data at once. The wind, the sky cars flying close by, the minor fluctuations of the kinetic barrier around the window. His right pointer finger, which hadn't left the trigger since the moment his target appeared, increased the pressure, and within a moment, he felt the kickback of the bullet leaving the barrel. He watched for a moment longer, seeing how cracks appeared on the window, and most importantly, how the torso of his target disappeared into nothingness. The hunter lowered the rifle, and Lawrence Barnes let out a sigh of relief. His mission was done, and the only thing left to do was to leave no evidence that he had ever been here. Chapter 57. December 9th, 2173, 1952, Ilium to Solar System, Nos Astra. I stepped out of the shuttle behind the 2 of my guards, who had jumped out before the shuttle even landed, to secure the landing pad. The sun was getting lower, and to prevent it from blinding me, I held up my left hand to protect my eyes from its rays. 3 pairs of heavy footsteps followed me out of the shuttle, and I didn't have to turn around to know that Commander Abebe was walking a few steps behind my right shoulder, and 2 more guards were following us. A simple nod from one of the 2 guards who had jumped out of the shuttle was enough to convey that it was safe to proceed out of the protection the closeness to the shuttle gave us. With an unseen and unheard command, Commander Abebe directed the other guards to form a loose square around us. I wasn't prone to feeling nervous in dangerous situations, since I had lived through too much for that. But I appreciated their protective behavior nonetheless. And considering that I was about to walk into the lion's den, their protection would probably be dearly needed for me to get out of there without a scratch. There wasn't any doubt in my mind that I would walk out of there alive. Some may call it arrogance, others foolishness, but I called it confidence. I knew what I would walk into and had planned accordingly. Furthermore, the guards I took with me, aside from Commander Abebe, who was a force of nature in battle in her own right, were the best of the best among my forces here on Ilium, and could measure up to any N3 graduate. Besides, they weren't the only ones close by. A little bit longer than a week ago, I got an invitation from Ayala Nassar to a circle meeting, where she wanted to mediate between me and Cesario. At first, I had scoffed at the idea. There would be no mediation between me and Cesario as long as the arbiter pulled his strings and Cesario was confident in his success. Yet something within me had hesitated at dismissing the invitation out of hand. Perhaps there would be an opportunity, or there was more going on than I realized. Somehow I felt it was a mixture of both. Taking a leap of faith, I decided to accept the invitation and come to the meeting Nassar was organizing on a neutral ground. Nonetheless, I wanted to go into the meeting with as many advantages as I could get, so I relayed the message that I would need Eclipse out of the picture as soon as possible. And the AIS delivered, as they always do. I would have to send Andrew a gift basket for sending someone so competent in his chosen profession. It was always nice to work with people who knew what they were doing and worked fast to boot. It was almost enough to do away with the irritation I felt at the question he had asked me on behalf of the wonderful Madam President. Just thinking about it slowly started to raise my temper. I put more into the alliance than almost everyone else, and now they're acting like I am a dog that they can whistle back whenever I do something they don't like. And the worst part will be that I can't go against their wishes exactly. If I want to become the ambassador, I can't show them the bird and expect to be welcomed with open arms when I start to make a serious bid for the position. Furthermore, I had already planned to spend some time within the Alliance territory to concentrate on projects closer to home before relocating to the Citadel after a year. I had already ordered some of my people to organize my timetable for the next year, and everything was in place for it. Now, even if I chose to ignore the Alliance's leadership's suggestion, I would still look like I was obeying them. The only reason I wasn't considering ignoring and showing them what a bad idea it was to think that I could be ordered around like an army grunt was that it had been Andrew who conveyed the wishes of the Alliance government. He did make a good case in their favor and had taken my initial outburst at their audacity with a grace that not many could boast about. Well, I hadn't completely let myself go. After all, Andrew was one of my best friends and didn't deserve to bear the full brunt of my anger. Only a little bit, since he decided to go with their suggestion. In the end, the only reasonable action I could take in response to them was to show them my displeasure and to make certain that they would never be able to put me on a leash if I didn't want them to. Of course, that would have to happen behind closed doors. It wasn't difficult to see and understand that the Alliance didn't have any other option. At least, I saw it after calming down and thinking about the situation and possible responses logically. If I ignored them, the Alliance would have to react more drastically, something neither of us wanted, or they would show that one of their citizens could do whatever he wanted without censure. I would have to take my house arrest without question if I didn't want the Alliance to lose face within the galactic community. And that was something I wanted to prevent, as our reputation hadn't cemented itself enough in the heads of the other political entities in society to not take a hit that would take years to mend. Nonetheless, it annoyed me, and I would hold a grudge, even if it was petty, since they had no other choice. I forced the annoyance back down and cleared my mind to focus on what was before me. I could think about how to get back at them later when I was safely inside the Alliance territory. The walk to the door was short, and around halfway I could lower my hand as I didn't have to shield my eyes from the sun anymore, which had disappeared behind another skyscraper. Like most doors, it opened with a near-silent hiss and went sideways into the wall, and the two guards in front of me entered the building first before giving me a nod that it was safe to proceed. The moment I entered the building, a shiver went down my back, and my eyes flitted from side to side to find the source of my discomfort. I couldn't find anything. Not that I expected to find something if my guards signaled that it was safe, but the feeling refused to go away. "Is something wrong, sir?" asked Commander Ababe, who noticed the tension in my shoulders. I threw her a look that conveyed my wariness and said, "I don't know what it is, but something is wrong. Stay on your guard, but don't start anything. We don't want to appear as the aggressors." All five straightened their postures at my order and replied with a simultaneous, "Yes, sir." And with a nod from me, we continued toward the elevator, which would bring us to the level where the circle would meet. Thankfully, it didn't take long for the elevator to arrive after we found it, and while it was a tight fit for 6 people, especially since 5 of them wore armor and carried weapons that were good enough for a special operations team, It wasn't too uncomfortable. Hopefully nobody manipulated the elevator so its brakes wouldn't engage after someone triggered its downfall. That reminded me I wanted to update the general safety measures in the branches I visited the most. Ilium was akin to a fortress for the moment, with the whole extra platoon of guards and security officers. But the other three, Earth, Terra Nova, and the Citadel, hadn't enjoyed the same attention, a lapse to be addressed sooner than later. With a simple ding, the elevator arrived at the right level, and its doors opened slowly. Two guards exited the elevator and froze for a moment before signaling Commander Abebe to join them. Her eyes narrowed, and her right hand instinctively went toward the pistol on her hip, clenching its grip tightly, ready to draw it at the slightest provocation. Understanding that I would be in the way if I exited right now, I took a few steps behind the two remaining guards, who positioned themselves between me and the exit to shield me in case a firefight started. Just like their commander, they tightened their grip on their rifles, and if they didn't wear armored gloves, I'm sure I would have seen their knuckles turn white. "What's the problem?" I heard Commander Abebe asking, with a barely loud enough voice as she went to the two tense guards outside the elevator. Instead of answering their commander, one of the guards just nodded in the direction in front of him, and I could see how every emotion on Commander Abebe's face disappeared, and nothing but a stone-cold mask remained. I could see how a soft blue flicker washed over her body that could be mistaken for a fluctuation of her kinetic shield, yet wasn't. She had activated a shield booster that would give her barriers additional power for a few minutes before needing to recharge. It would give her enough time to get behind cover if she came under fire in the open. While I could only see half of the standoff, I could metaphorically see the tension coming from them in waves. It took almost a whole minute before Commander Abebe relaxed her posture marginally and gave the signal that we could come out. The two in front of me hesitated for a second, but walked out of the elevator with their rifles held in their hands, and I followed them close behind, with only enough space between us to not hinder their or my movements. I could feel my heart beating quicker as we stepped out, but I tried my best not to let anything show on my face other than calm and confidence. No matter what was waiting outside, I had to project an image of strength, not just for myself and the people accompanying me, who looked to me for guidance, but for everyone watching too. Nervousness, apprehension, and alarm were emotions one should do their best to push down and not show even the slightest hint of them, as they were points one's opponent could exploit if one wasn't careful. The reverse could be said too. If one showed calmness and confidence, even if the situation wasn't in one's favor, it could unsettle one's opponent and make it easier to gain the advantage. It was a lesson I learned through experience and served me well throughout the years. Sometimes I felt like an actor in a play with far-reaching consequences if I didn't play my role to perfection. When I joined Commander Abebe, I finally saw what had them so on edge. The hallway was filled with soldiers standing guard, their armor identifying them as mostly Nasara's private troops, but I could see those belonging to Cesario among them too. It didn't take me long to understand that my guards were outnumbered, even if one were to count only Cesario's troops, who were the most obvious enemy arrayed against us. And that was only those we could see. Nobody knew how many were waiting on another floor. Yet the same could be said about our side. I wasn't naive enough to not have the surrounding area teeming with my people in case of an emergency. For example, a shuttle was waiting on the landing platform of a nearby skyscraper with a running engine and a full intervention team, and could be there in less than a minute. The rest, with one exception, would take longer, but not by far. My hand landed on Commander Abebe's shoulder and squeezed. She couldn't feel it through her armor, but the look she sent me told me she understood what I wanted her to know. She answered me with a nod before she started to walk toward the meeting room, leading our group. The remaining four fell back into formation around me, shielding me from every side, never giving the soldiers standing in the hallway the chance to attack me unimpeded. They stood a bit closer to me than when we entered the building. Perhaps it was because the hallway was more narrow, and the other soldiers didn't help in giving us enough space. Or maybe my people felt more protective than before and wanted to pull me out of the way in case anyone even thought about lifting their weapon in my direction. During our walk, I noticed something about the soldiers we passed. When I first met the circle, there had been guards from every species within existing military, even a few Batarians, despite their reputation among the population of the other species. Even humans had been among their numbers, and humanity wasn't so widespread yet that this was an ordinary occurrence. And I still could remember the respectful nods they gave me when I passed them. But now I couldn't see a single human, not even among those I identified as Nessera's troops. Not a single one. It wasn't like the sudden insight stopped me in my tracks, but there was a feeling in my gut that couldn't mean anything good. There had to be a reason I wasn't seeing any humans, and that reason couldn't be anything good. Of course, it could be that the humans had been in the employ of Nisko Ron, and they left after his death, yet I didn't think that this was it. Either I hadn't suppressed my reaction as well as I thought, or Commander Ababe knew me well enough to notice even the slightest changes. If I had to guess and hope, I would say it was the latter. She turned her head barely enough to see my face from the corner of her eyes and furrowed her eyebrows. In return, I scratched the left side of my chin with my right hand, a signal we had agreed on that I would give if I noticed something that could potentially be dangerous for us. Sadly, I wouldn't be able to communicate what I had noticed, but a warning was better than nothing. Commander Abebe nodded almost unnoticed, and if I hadn't looked for it, I wouldn't have seen it. Finally, we arrived at the meeting room, and thankfully, there weren't more guards outside than in the hallway toward it. 2 outside, the rest with me, I ordered. Lepiski, Cheklo, that's your job. Stay on guard. The 2 guards, chosen by Commander Ababe, saluted and went to stand opposite the door to have a free field of view of the Turian and Solarian standing at the sides of the door. Let's go, I said, opened the door, and entered the room with confident and self-assured steps. My eyes slowly observed the room while the remaining 2 guards took their positions beside the door, and Commander Abebe stood to my right. The meeting room was spacious. The wall on the other side was made out of glass, and while I couldn't see any other doors into the room other than the one I entered through, there could be hidden doorways for soldiers to enter the room. Not that there would be any need since there were enough troops inside the room for us to be outnumbered almost 3-1. Finally, my eyes locked on the 2 people sitting at the table in the middle of the room. At the head of the table sat the Asariaela Nessara, and to her right the Turian Quintinius Cesario. They were sitting closer to each other than one would expect for a meeting with the declared goal of mediation, as it would imply that there was already an understanding between one of the parties and the mediator. The correct answer to something like that would be to take the seat on Nessara's other side in the position opposite Cesario. Yet I took the chair directly in front of me at the other end of the table, where I sat in direct opposition to Nessara. And if that wasn't a statement, I didn't know what would even count as one. Nessara Cesario, I greeted with a polite nod at each of them. Do we wait for Detiovi or begin without her? The purpose of this meetings is to mediate between you and Quintinius. I do not think Morala's presence is needed or beneficial for this. She's close to you, and you have worked together on a few projects. I don't think it would be fair to Quintinius if you have an ally, and he doesn't. And the Arbiter isn't an ally, I countered while raising my eyebrow. Cesario scoffed at my reply. But she isn't here, is she? Not that I can hold it against her. After all, you wouldn't hesitate to try and kill her. I'm surprised that you didn't try it with me. First of all, I replied, I'm civilized. Starting a fight when someone asks for a peaceful meeting is the opposite of that. Secondly, I wasn't the one who started the fight, but I will be the one to end it, and on my terms at that. So, you're here to dictate your terms to me and the Arbiter? Quite arrogant of you. Arrogance has nothing to do with it. It is simply a fact that my position is much better than yours, and it is only a matter of time until you have no other chance but to surrender. Cesario threw me a scathing look that promised me a painful death, but I sent a smile in his direction in response. His promises didn't intimidate me in the slightest, and there was no lie in my words. It was only a matter of time until there would be nothing the Arbiter and her loyal dog could do against me. Yet, one could call me impatient, but I didn't want to wait until my enemies died a slow death, and I was sure that the Arbiter and Cesario were preparing for a last desperate strike before their strength and means waned into nothing. Peace, my friends, said Nessara placatingly. We're here to find a solution that ends the hostility between your 2 groups in a way that, while maybe not perfect, everyone can live with. At her words, Cesario's mandibles flared, and he exhaled a trilling breath while his hands, which lay on the table, clenched into fists before relaxing again. While I have my reservations, the Arbiter concurs with Ms. Nassara. It would be for the best to end this. I didn't even try to hide that I was rolling my eyes at his statement. He knew very well that Nassara's mediation would be the only way how he would come out of this alive. The only reason why he was angry was that it hurt his pride. Everything could have been avoided if he and the Arbiter had looked farther than my species, and they would have seen the amount of resources and people I could call on beforehand. And you, Oscar, I can't imagine that this conflict is very helpful when you have to deal with Eclipse all over the galaxy. I mean, the portion of Eclipse here on Ilium is leaving after their commander's death. But the rest of the mercenary organization is still your enemy, right? I snorted at the unsubtle reminder from Nassara that I had started a fight with one of the oldest and biggest mercenary groups currently existing in the galaxy. Don't worry about that, I answered, waving my hand in a contemptuous gesture. The hostilities between me and Eclipse have ended. Since when? Shot out Cesario, unable to hide his shock and disbelief. Since yesterday evening, I replied with a sneer. Not that the details concern you or anybody. Sedaris and I came to an understanding. Well, to call it an understanding would be going too far. It was more that thanks to my upcoming house arrest, I had to finish up the small-time war with Eclipse, and I wanted to do it on my terms instead of letting it simply stop when I couldn't act anymore. Right after I got the confirmation that Eclipse's local leader, Kalara Iyori, was eliminated, I got in contact with one of the Shadow Broker's known intermediaries to facilitate a call with Jonah Sedaris. I disliked dealing with the Shadow Broker, but there wasn't anyone who could do this as fast as I wanted this to happen. After I paid a considerable sum in advance, to not give them any idea of alternative payment methods, I got a date, a time, and a number. The call itself didn't take long, and most of the time, Sedaris and I were exchanging threats to see who was the bigger and more dangerous dog. Thankfully, we managed to strike a deal between the threats, which broke down to her and her organization staying out of Alliance territory while I stayed out of the innermost Asari space where the core of her power was located. Furthermore, we agreed to stop killing each other anywhere else. Not the most elaborate agreement, but it was enough. Of course, I knew it wouldn't hold more for long, but I guessed I would have some peace for about a few years before Sedaris became brave again and forgot that I dominated our conflict. Well, that would be her future problem, not mine. I would just end it. Again. That is great news for you, said Nassara, and gave me a radiant smile, a smile that was as brittle as it was fake. Yeah, it is, I agreed, leaned back in my chair and put my hands in my lap. And I would like to put this conflict here between the Arbiter and myself to rest as well. That's great to hear. In that case, we should, started Nassara before I interrupted her by raising my hand. There is just one thing that hinders me from going forward with this. I may be nitpicking about it since it's only a matter of formality, but it annoys me nonetheless. Please tell. Maybe we can sort it out, Nassara said, while Cesario tried to kill me with his stare. It was obvious that he didn't expect the peace I brokered with Eclipse, and if he and the Arbiter truly wanted to negotiate, it would put them into an even worse situation than the simple mass exodus of Eclipse troops here on Ilium. It is something you said, Nassara. Something I said? She questioned, and the confusion was plain to see in her eyes. Yes, I replied. You said we're here to find a solution between your groups. It should have been ours instead. What do you mean? Please don't insult me by keeping this charade going on any longer, Madam Arbiter. The second I called her Arbiter, Nassara's whole demeanor changed. It was like she was growing older right before my eyes. No, she wasn't growing older, but it was like growing more mature in seconds. In truth, she simply let any pretense and mask she showed me since I met her for the first time fall and showed me her true face. Cesario, on the other hand, seemed more nervous and fidgety than before trial. His eyes flitted back and forth between me and Nassara, yet he calmed down a bit after Nassara put a hand on his shoulder. Congratulations, you've found out the truth, but I don't think it will help you much. How would you humans say, you're the fly in the spider's web? We will see, I responded to the obvious threat and smiled confidently. Chapter 58. December 9th, 2173. 2010, Ilium Tessal System, Nos Astra. How did you find out? Asked Nasara, also known as the Arbiter, as she leaned back in her chair and interlaced her fingers in her lap. I have to say, it took me some time to connect the dots. You did your best to obscure your traces, and many of those my people and I found did lead to nothing. Yet you got too greedy and contacted the wrong people with your plans. I copied her by leaning back in my chair, and adopting a relaxed posture as if my guards weren't outnumbered by hers in the room. Well, it wasn't you personally who made the mistake. It was your pawn over there. I waved my hand in Cicerio's direction, who sat to Nasara's right. You, spat Cicerio and jumped out of his chair, clearly angry because of my taunt. Nasara put her hand on his arm and said, "Calm down, Quintinius. Mr. Denebren is trying to make you lose your cool. Please don't play his game. He knows he's in a bad position and tries to find his feet again." At her words, Cicerio visibly calmed down and sat back down. I couldn't help the smirk that appeared on my face. He was utterly under her thumb, and when I directed the smirk at him, I tried my best to convey my thoughts to him. It seemed to work as his mandibles flared, and his eyes were windows to the anger and hate he felt toward me, but he managed to control himself better this time. Perhaps it had something to do with the fact that Nasara still had her hand on his arm. What kind of mistake did my dear Quintinius commit? My smirk turned wolfish, and I tapped my foot twice on the floor. Cerberus, I simply said, and enjoyed the widening of Cicerio's and Nasara's eyes. It seems like they like me more alive than dead. They couldn't tell me about your proposal fast enough after your agent went out of the door. Cerberus, huh? Scoffed Nasara. I wouldn't have expected them to run to you. They seemed more ambitious than that. I have to say I'm disappointed. I let out a short laugh. To me, it seems like you haven't done your homework on Cerberus. They are ambitious, that's a fact. It's just that you missed what their goal is. Their goal is to put humanity at the top of the galactic food chain, and in their eyes, I'm one of the people who is going to make that possible. Killing me and throwing the Alliance into chaos is going directly against that goal. It wouldn't surprise me if those other people who were willing to go with your scheme are going to find their ambitions cut short, and not just by my retaliation, but by theirs too. Cerberus does not have any patience for those willing to stab their own people in the back at the words of outsiders. The look Nasara sent me would make lesser people freeze in their place and unable to speak another word, but my smile only got bigger. In fact, I felt downright giddy. Nasara, in her persona as the Arbiter, has given me much grief, and any chance to stick it to her was very welcome. Of course, I let nothing of that show on my face other than the smirk I continued to hold to show that I wasn't intimidated by her and her show of force in the room. Nasara's face looked placid as she asked, Yet even while this organization was talked to you, there wouldn't be anything leading toward me. Even if you found everyone else we contacted, Quintinius was the one organizing the contact with the people inside the Alliance, and every clue you would have been able to gather would point toward him. Something useless to you, since you already knew that he was working with the Arbiter to bring you down. Oh, how I would have liked to have a wine glass in my hand to swirl it around, like in those old movies, to waste time before answering. I may be getting on in the age department, but my taste for the dramatic and flair was growing too. At least I felt so. In another decade or so, I could see myself turning around in a swivel armchair with a black cat on my lap that I was petting while explaining how my plans came to fruition. The thought struck my mind, and it didn't want to leave. Why were we doing this? I was doing it because I sent out a signal to my troops to prepare to attack when I tapped my foot on the floor to activate the transmitter in my shoe. It would probably take a few more honors before everyone was in place, and they would only attack when I tapped my foot twice again. Of course, that depended on the factor that the signal could get out of the room. If they took the precaution of proofing the room against signals, that would be useless, and I would have to rely on the scouts on the skyscraper opposite the room to read the situation correctly. After all, the visual signs I would have to give to communicate with them were extremely obvious, so that no small gestures I did by chance could be mistaken for a sign to intervene. You are right, I returned to the conversation by acknowledging Nasara's conjecture. Everything led back to Cesario, at least from those contacted within Alliance territory. But these people weren't the only ones you contacted, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to weaken the Alliance as a whole if its power was simply shifted within. You needed people from outside to change the political landscape. I could see how my words affected her as the anger in her eyes lessened marginally, and disbelief joined with it. After all, you wanted to improve your standing with the matriarchs around Asari space. That's why you're planning to kill me in the first place, instead of simply taking over all my assets here on Ilium. And you weren't as careful with them as you should have been. Cesario couldn't take your place then, since they wouldn't have taken you seriously, and you wanted them to know that it was you who created the opportunity for the matriarchs to take advantage of a weakened and disarrayed alliance. Nasara was about to say something, but I held up my hand to forestall her retort. I know what you're going to say, and you're right. None of the matriarchs talked to me, and I didn't even try in the first place. But I didn't have to. The kind of moves they would have to make in order to take maximum advantage of my hypothetical death have to be prepared in advance. I just had to look at who prepared, when they started to, and the people who met them in the months before that. And guess whose name appeared on the flight schedules of planets far away from Thessia when you said you were trying to find somebody willing to sell me some property? And by the way, it's a rhetorical question. Instead of getting angry and screaming at me, Nasara started to clap slowly. The sound of the clapping echoed through the otherwise silent room. It was a ghastly sound, and I had to admit that it sent a shudder down my back. My smirk left my face, but a small smile returned to it after I noticed the trick she was using. She used her biotic powers, a relatively minuscule amount, around her hands to make the slaps sound more powerful. I was sincerely impressed by her control over her biotic powers. Any time before, I had only seen their use in combat situations, or very rarely in construction zones. Yet none of those had the sheer finesse I was seeing right now. It seems like I underestimated you, said Nasara. After all, you didn't suspect me for quite some time, so I thought you didn't look through my acting. You had me fooled, I admitted easily, and without a hint of shame or hesitation. For most of the time, even. The first time I was attacked by your forces was when I came back from our first private meeting, so you were on the list of suspects. But I falsely thought nobody would be so stupid to make themselves the prime suspect on purpose. If that was your plan, then I applaud you. The flattery is appreciated but unneeded. I just saw a chance and took it. The rest is a coincidence. I hummed at her reply. Can we finally get on? While it's amusing to see you two exchange words, I would like to return to my business. I still have to coordinate the people to take over Denebren's business, ma'am, interjected Cesario with a deferential nod to Nasara. I had almost forgotten that he was even inside the room, Nasara's newly revealed presence drowning his without any effort. Patience, my dear Quintinius. Everything is going well, said Nasara with a smile and snapped her fingers. On both sides of the room, a portion of the walls went sideways to reveal pathways, where 3 soldiers each came through with rifles in their hands. My 2 guards immediately raised their weapons and pointed them at the newly arrived troops, ready to shoot at the slightest sign that they were going to attack us. Commander Abebe's hand also went towards her hip and her pistol, but my left hand shot out and I grabbed her arm. She shot me a disbelieving look, and I shook my head in reply. Right now wasn't the time to attack, as we were even more outnumbered than before, and our extra equipment wouldn't stand up to these numbers of opponents. Despite her visible reluctance, Commander Abebe nodded and moved her hand away from her pistol, but I could see her clenched fists. She would have loved to draw her pistol and start shooting everyone not on our side to be done with this situation. It wasn't like I couldn't understand her. If our positions were reversed and I was tasked with Abebe's protection, I would rather take action and take out any threats in the near vicinity than wait for something to happen and have to react instead of acting. Yet, the time wasn't right. I raised an eyebrow and asked, a show of power and intimidation? Haven't we already established that you have more people here than I do? Your people are well trained, almost as good as professionally trained soldiers. I feel safer if my troops outnumber yours by a larger number. Otherwise, I don't like their chances against yours, admitted Nisara. If her troops had any reaction to her words, I couldn't spot any. In any case, a slight smirk returned to my face. Well, thanks for the compliment. I can't take full credit for their abilities by myself, but I convey your admiration to the people in charge of their training. How nice of you, but that will not be necessary, or rather, you will not have the opportunity to do so. Nisara replied with a smile that was simultaneously angelic and cruel. Or did you think otherwise? I already thought this was going to be your plan, but I hoped you wouldn't go down this route. It is so uninspired. Not every plan has to be refined. Sometimes it is better to make your hands dirty and return everything to its starting point. The circle can be re-established with new members. I have done it 4 times over the last 300 years, so why not again? Return to the beginning, huh? Will you kill the Tioev too? I questioned. That is already in motion. Detiovi has a meeting, and sadly her shuttle will have an engine malfunction that will end deadly. Thankfully, some of her assets will be transferred to the circle accounts, so not everything is bad. I blinked, nothing more. While I had a beneficial, working relationship with her, and we had been lovers for a time, there was no reason for me to try to prevent her death. We were using each other to get what we wanted, and sex had been just an optional feature we wanted. For the fun of it, and not because we had any deeper feelings for each other. Besides, what could I realistically do right now? Call her while more than a dozen guns were pointed at me. Whether she lived or died would be up to her, and I knew she would have the same opinion if our roles were reserved. Furthermore, after today, our paths would probably only cross during social functions on the Citadel, since I wouldn't need her help with anything anymore. So, you're committed to making a clean sweep. Otherwise, you would let Detiovi live, since she never directly went against you or your goals. That's correct, replied Nisara. The circle can be rebuilt with new people, perhaps under a different name, but it will continue. With your assets and the promises of the matriarchs, the new circle will be more influential and powerful than before, added Citerio, probably already thinking he would live like a king and as one of the most powerful arms smugglers on this side of the galaxy. Instead of being annoyed with him and his boasting, I gave him a pitying look and smile. So you have the delusion that you will be a part of the future she envisions. Citerio, you are a poor fool. What are you talking about? Of course I will be, he objected, and turned to look at Nisara, who also gave him a look that wasn't hard to interpret. I'm sorry, my dear Quintinius, but Oscar is right. I said I would start anew, and I mean it. She jerked her head in his direction, and every single one of her guard in this room raised their weapon and started to fire at him. His personal shields didn't stand a chance and broke before he even had the chance to fully comprehend Nisara's words and what was happening around him. Personally, I hope that he quickly died before he could understand that he never was more than a convenient pawn for her, and that the words she used to make her promises to him had been the only payment he would ever get from her for doing the dirty work. If it had been me, I would have given him what he wanted. Good and loyal service should be rewarded, but not with a bullet in the back. Cold, I said from behind Commander Abebe, who had positioned herself between me and the rest of the room when the shooting started. Nisara simply shrugged at my comment, ignoring the guns my guards pointed at her, something hers did not, and replied in kind by pointing theirs at me. He was useful for a time, but I didn't see any value in a long-term partnership, and his crush was starting to annoy me. It had been cute at the beginning, but it got old fast. Using it was convenient, but over the centuries, I had much better partners than him, and I mean in every category that counts. That's more than I ever wanted to know. As long as it doesn't concern me, I don't want to know what you do behind closed doors, I replied with played and exaggerated disgust. Impressive, said Nisara. A dozen guns pointed at you and not even a blink. The same guns that just killed a man, and you still can joke around. Is it just you, or are all humans so nonchalant and unconcerned about their imminent death? I would say it is just me, I answered. And you seem to think that I will die today. You don't? Nisara asked, surprised. I would not have thought you would deny what is right before you. And what is right before me? People with guns? You? Nothing insurmountable. Nothing insurmountable? I admire your bravery. but I have to say it is futile. I narrowed my eyes. This conversation's topic was too focused on me and Nasara's desire to kill me. I still didn't know if my people were in position, and I had to prolong our talk to be absolutely sure that I wouldn't be left with only 5 people on my side, 2 of which weren't even in this room. Just as I was about to try and steer the conversation in another direction, the communicator inside my shoe vibrated twice in short intervals. I had to suppress the smile that wanted to appear on my face. Any sign that things were going to go my way wasn't something I should show right now if I wanted to keep the advantage. Tapping my foot 3 times in response, I gave the order to slowly advance and take out as many hostiles as silently as possible to have an easier time when the situation went hot. Furthermore, they would be quicker at my position. It has nothing to do with bravery, I replied to Nasara, slowing my speech minimally so that nobody would notice, but still waste some time. I simply have confidence that I will walk out of here alive, maybe with a few hairs out of place, but alive nonetheless. Quite the confidence you have. And as I said, admirable. It's a shame you are in my way, and in the way of the plans for the alliance of others among my people. If you weren't, you could have been great. That's debatable. I would say I did a lot to get the alliance to where it is right now, and most people in the alliance would say I am a great man. I should say that I am not, but I am not a person known for false modesty. I leaned forward, putting my elbows on the table and sustaining my chin on my hands. You mentioned plans for the alliance. Care to elaborate? Nasara copied my posture with an added smirk. Why so curious? It isn't like it will have any use for you. Like you said, curiosity. Knowing things is something vital to people like us. You should understand, I don't think you are that different from me in this regard. It is like an itch we have to scratch. And since you are so sure that my death is imminent, treat it like the last request of a dying man. Well, you are not wrong about the itch you're talking about. You never know when some knowledge becomes useful, she mused. And while you're right that one shouldn't deny a dying man's request, the knowledge wouldn't be of use to you. For me, it simply is that you're an obstacle and an opportunity to gain more power and wealth here on Ilium and back on Thessia. For others, they want control over the alliance. I don't really buy into it, but a group back home sees themselves, and the Asari as a whole, as the guides toward the right future for the galaxy, and the alliance is too strong and independent for them. So they're looking for ways to gain influence over the direction the alliance is going to evolve in the future. And you're the lever they want to pull to gain that control. So, typical Asari arrogance? I asked. I wouldn't say that. Nasara waved my comment away. We are perfect for such a position, but I don't see the appeal in trying to direct you hairless monkeys toward a fraction of our greatness. Hairless monkeys? I wouldn't have expected you to be a speciest, I commented. You seem above such a petty thing. I am not, she countered. I studied your history. Aren't you humans descended from monkeys? If your bodies were full of fur, I wouldn't be able to find a difference by sight alone. I sighed at her words and couldn't help but roll my eyes. Hearing such casual insults from aliens in powerful positions wasn't unusual. Yet I heard that particular insult often enough to tire of it. Before I could say anything, be it insulting her or trying to stay polite, I heard a small explosion. From the volume and the vibrations reaching the room, I guessed it happened 2 floors below us. What was that? Nasara asked while jumping off her chair, which tumbled down to the ground. I would say that my people currently are fighting their way up and should be here in a few minutes, I replied, leaning back in my chair and putting my right hand on my cheek. Not a second after I finished talking, every single hostile gun was pointed at me, and Nasara gained a blue corona when she activated her biotic powers. In response, my people grouped themselves around me, and Commander Abebe pulled out her pistol while her left hand hovered over a small box at her hip, ready to throw the transportable shield barrier to create a defense between me and the rest of the room. You really think they will be here in time? Nasara hissed, and her biotics flared up. In this room are enough people that you and yours will be dead before a single one of your reinforcements even arrives on this floor. Let's agree to disagree. I replied and used my right index finger to draw a small circle in the air while tapping my right foot twice in rapid succession. Not waiting for anything to happen, I threw myself to the ground, the rest of my team following me down to the ground. At the same time, Commander Ababy detached the portable shield generator from her armor, but didn't deploy it immediately since she knew what would happen. As if waiting for this moment, which could be a very true statement, the glass front on the other side of the room broke and flew inwards, showering the room in splinters. Yet there were far more important things to worry about. For example, how more than half of Nasara's troops fell dead to the ground in the next 10 seconds before they could react to the sudden attack. As the portable shield deployed, the door behind me sprang open, and the 2 guards who had remained outside sprinted into the room. One of them was less sprinting and more dragging himself with a limp leg. Yet before he could find any cover, a member of Nasara's troops took the opportunity and gunned him down. That one didn't have the chance to rejoice about taking out one of my few guards. Before Commander Ababy bent around me and returned the favor with a couple well-placed shots from her pistol, sadly, the snipers I had placed on the skyscraper with a view of this room did not have a clear field of view anymore after Nasara's troops ducked and she activated the emergency window shutters. Furthermore, the confusion of the attack faded away, allowing Nasara and her troops to reorganize themselves and mount a counterattack. The shield before slowly turned red from the barrage of gunfire trying to get to me, indicating its weakening. Yet before it could collapse from gunfire, a wave of biotic power came from the other side around the room, throwing me and my group toward the wall on our side. The only reason we weren't immediately beset by Nasara's troops was that her biotic push destroyed the table in the room, and her troops dove instinctively out of the way of the flying debris. As I slammed against the wall, my kinetic barriers absorbed most of the damage, but as I took a deep breath, I knew that some of my bones were bruised. Nothing that a few days of rest wouldn't heal, but I would need to be alive to have the time. My eyes fixed on the other side of the room, and I could see Nasara slowly walking toward me through the destroyed room, her troops fanning out through the room, keeping their guns trained on my guards and Commander Ababy, and only Nasara's raised hands stopped them from outright shooting us. After all, they didn't have to fear any snipers anymore due to the emergency shutters. A valiant effort, but ultimately useless. I will be long gone before your body even drops cold on the ground. She lifted her own pistol toward me, and recognizing the model, I knew that it would overwhelm the remaining charge of my shields and burst my chest open like an overripe fruit. It's been, before she could finish her sentence, 2 things happened at the same time. Commander Ababy jumped toward me in an effort to shield me from the bullet, and the emergency shutters exploded inward, startling everyone in the room. Nasara fired her weapon in surprise, and the bullet ripped through Commander Ababy's arm, blood splashing over my face. Yet, the other bullets that started to fly were far more important since they tore through everyone still standing, which amounted exclusively to Nasara and her troops, dropping them like flies. I looked to the newly opened wall on the other side and could see a shuttle hovering right outside, its side door open, and 6 soldiers in Adastra colors, with their rifles in their hands, standing there. "Perfect timing," I shouted. "Now get in here and bring your medic. We've got wounded." My head turned to Ababy, and I asked concerned, "How is it?" "I will survive. It is only a flesh wound. The bullet didn't hit anything vital." Well, Commander Ababy reassured me. Trusting her judgment, I gave her a nod and helped her stand up. She held the arm with the wound, her pistol still clenched tightly in her hand. I slowly walked towards where Nasara had fallen and looked down at her body. She was still alive, her breathing rattling, and the blood filling her mouth was dribbling down. Seeing this, I held out my hand to Commander Ababy, who understood what I wanted and put her pistol in my hand. Lifting the pistol to Nasara's head, I looked into her eyes and I could see the realization in them. With a smile, I repeated her words back at her. A valiant effort, but ultimately useless. My finger pulled the trigger, and a bang ended the threat of the Arbiter. I turned to Commander Ababy, who was seen to by a medic, and said, "Let's clean this up. I will have to bribe some people to ignore this mess, but we will be off Ilium before the week is over. Furthermore, I think we all deserve a small vacation back in Alliance territory After all this excitement,